The moment Vanessa slammed the divorce papers on the polished mahogany table, she believed she had won. Her husband, Gregory, a man she once loved, was now nothing but a failed businessman in her eyes, a poor man stripped of his worth. She walked, away with her designer heels clicking like verdicts of finality, convinced she had escaped a life of struggle. But what Vanessa didn't know, and what no one could have guessed, was that the man she discarded so ruthlessly was secretly sitting on a $100 million fortune, hidden behind the facade of failure. How did Gregory, once seemingly defeated, build a fortune that not even his wife could see? And why did Vanessa never suspect the quiet brilliance beneath his quiet despair? Could the poor husband she scorned now hold the power to rewrite the story of their lives and leave her stunned? Beyond repair, the courtroom smelled of polished wood, stale perfume, and whispered triumphs. Vanessa Hart strode in, her high heels clicking like the final judgment she had been waiting for. The divorce papers were already in her hand, crisp and heavy, and she could almost feel the weight of victory pressing down on Gregory Hart, sitting across from her with an unnerving calm. He wore a simple gray suit, nothing flashy, his tie slightly loose and his posture polite but composed. To the world, he was defeated, a man whose business, coal-to-tea fabricators, had crumbled under a series of disastrous contracts, mismanaged accounts, and sheer bad luck. Vanessa's eyes burned with scorn, her lips curling into a triumph she had longed to taste for months. "You're nothing but a failure, Gregory," she spat, her voice sharp enough to slice through the murmurs of the courtroom. "A poor, useless man. I deserve better." Gregory looked at her, his calm exterior hiding the storm inside. The truth of his mind was a labyrinth she would never enter, one built from years of silent resilience, patience, and careful observation. He had watched his company collapse, watched the workers he had once trusted falter, and seen Vanessa's contempt grow from subtle irritation to open disdain. He remembered the nights when he had sat alone in the dim light of his office, crunching numbers he knew were doomed, and prayed for a way forward he could not yet see. The memory of late nights spent negotiating contracts that fell through, of relentless creditors knocking at his door, of the humiliation of failure pressing against his pride, it all coalesced into a quiet fire burning beneath his skin. Vanessa, on the other hand, had already moved on. She had met Raymond Pierce, a man whose charm and wealth promised the life she thought she deserved. She posted endless snapshots of glamorous dinners, exotic vacations, and sparkling engagement rings. Social media became her stage, and every like and comment a tiny dagger in the back of the man she had abandoned. Her contempt for Gregory had been born not from cruelty alone, but from ambition, a desire for security, status, and a life that his failing business could never provide. She had believed she was escaping the sinking ship, unaware that the tides were far from finished. Gregory left the courtroom quietly, unnoticed amid the flashes of paparazzi cameras and the whispering gossip of the city's elite. He returned to his small apartment, a stark contrast to the luxurious life Vanessa flaunted, and began performing manual labor, odd jobs, and small contracts to make ends meet. He shoveled, hammered, and repaired, enduring humiliation daily. Yet each task strengthened his resolve. He was building more than muscle. He was building patience, learning to observe and wait. Life had taught him a lesson in humility, but it had also gifted him the hidden skill of strategic endurance. It was during one particularly quiet evening, while sifting through a pile of mail, that the letter arrived. The envelope was thick, formal, stamped with the seal of attorney Samuel Attawale. It was a notification from the estate of his late uncle, Henry Cole, a wealthy man Gregory had known only in distant childhood memories. With trembling hands, he opened it to find words that would change the course of his life. He was the sole heir to an estate worth over $100 million. Shock rooted him to the floor as he read, his mind struggling to reconcile this sudden fortune with the image of the man Vanessa had abandoned. The inheritance was not just money. It was power, influence, and the ability to rise again from the depths she thought had swallowed him. Over the following weeks, Gregory navigated the logistics of the estate with meticulous care, acquiring properties, factories and investments all under the radar. He moved quietly, strategically, refusing to announce his resurgence. The city whispered about a mysterious new billionaire, a man who seemed to emerge from nowhere, yet commanded respect and admiration wherever he appeared. Meanwhile, Vanessa continued her life with Raymond, overconfident, unbothered, and blind to the seismic shift occurring in Gregory's world. She posted, smiled, and laughed, unaware that the man she once deemed worthless was orchestrating a quiet takeover of the very society she sought to dominate. Gregory observed from a distance, attending gala events and business conferences under a pseudonym, watching Vanessa's rise and her growing complacency. Each smile she offered Raymond, each toast she made, each glance of superiority, he catalogued, remembered, and waited. Patience had become his ally, discretion his armor. He was no longer the man she had left behind. He was the architect of a power she could not yet comprehend, the silent king poised to reclaim the narrative of their lives. As he watched her laugh at a charity gala, holding a diamond that would have been a dream in their past life, Gregory allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. The storm had not yet revealed its fury, but the first raindrops were falling. Vanessa was blind to it, yet the universe had already begun recalibrating the scales of justice. And Gregory knew, with every fiber of his being, that when the time came, every scorned word, every insult, every ounce of contempt would be paid back, not in rash revenge, but in the quiet, unstoppable triumph of someone who had never truly been defeated. Gregory's mornings began before sunrise, the city still draped in the muted hush of early light. While Vanessa sipped champagne at luxurious brunches or scrolled endlessly through the curated perfection of her social media life, he moved with deliberate purpose. The $100 million inheritance from Uncle Henry Cole had unlocked doors he hadn't even dared imagine in his darkest days. Yet he didn't rush. He knew the value of patience, of waiting until the right moment to step into the spotlight. Every property he acquired, every factory he took control of, every small investment he nurtured was another thread in a web that would eventually engulf the very society that had mocked him. The memory of coal-to-tea fabricators haunted him still, not with bitterness, but as a lesson. He recalled the contracts that slipped through his fingers, the employees he had failed despite his best efforts, and the countless nights he had lain awake wondering where it had all gone wrong. Each misfortune had been a test of his resolve, a crucible in which he forged not just survival but foresight. The business had collapsed under no fault of his own entirely. It had been a series of unforeseen disasters, poor timing, and the ruthless ambitions of those around him. Vanessa had seen only the surface, the immediate failure, and had abandoned him for Raymond, a man whose charm and wealth were dazzling but superficial. As Gregory visited the factories he now discreetly owned, he observed workers with a practiced eye, noting inefficiencies, hidden potential, and the pulse of human ambition. He remembered the humiliation of begging for contracts, of empty bank accounts, of staring at the red numbers of his failing balance sheets. Those days had taught him to listen, to calculate, to move with precision. Every gesture, every acquisition, was executed with the quiet authority of someone who had lived through failure and emerged not embittered, but enlightened. Vanessa, oblivious to the silent empire forming just beneath her radar, continued her ascent in high society. She dazzled at charity galas, flaunted her engagement to Raymond with images that seemed to scream perfection, and basked in the admiration of friends who had no knowledge of Gregory's resurgence. Each post, each laugh, each glittering accessory only tightened the contrast between her superficial triumph and Gregory's deliberate, unseen mastery. She had believed in the finality of the divorce, in the impotence of the man she had discarded. But reality has a way of rewriting assumptions when patience meets opportunity. Gregory's mornings bled into afternoons spent in meetings with financial advisors, estate managers, and legal teams, yet his presence remained discreet. No headlines announced the silent king as he acquired stakes in shipping companies, technology firms, and industrial sites. Word of a mysterious new billionaire spread quietly through whispers and speculation, each rumor increasing the aura of intrigue. Society began to stir, unaware that the man they once mocked was now orchestrating a subtle revolution in wealth and influence. One evening, As twilight bathed the city in violet and gold, Gregory attended a gala under an assumed name. He moved among the elite, unnoticed but observing everything. Vanessa glowed across the room, draped in a silver gown that caught the light like a star. She laughed with Raymond, tossing her head back, confident that her life had achieved the perfect balance of status and desire. She did not see the eyes that followed her, calm and calculating, nor did she feel the quiet ripple of inevitability that Gregory carried with him. He remembered their early years with a mixture of nostalgia and clarity. He had loved her with a fierceness she had once returned, believed in their dreams and shared visions of a future built together. And yet he also recalled the first cracks, the subtle disdain, the growing impatience when finances tightened, the whispered judgments of friends who deemed him inadequate. He had endured it silently because love had demanded patience. But the betrayal that followed when she left him for Raymond had been the final lesson in the necessity of foresight. Every decision he made now was influenced by that memory. The quiet accumulation of assets, the discreet management of his fortune, and the careful observation of Vanessa's rising arrogance. He did not seek revenge through malice, but through the inevitable collapse of her assumptions. He was building a reality so undeniable, so stark in its contrast to her perception, that when the moment arrived, her shock would be complete and irrevocable. Gregory's strategy included subtle tests of the society he now navigated. He listened to gossip, monitored social circles, and observed human behavior in its most superficial form. Vanessa's friends praised her, dismissed her past, and assumed she had triumphed. They did not suspect that every whispered story, every toast to her success was a narrative Gregory had already factored into his plans. The world that had mocked him, that had relished his fall, was unwittingly becoming a stage for his ultimate return. As the evening wore on, Gregory left the gala quietly, blending into the shadows as Vanessa and Raymond lingered under chandeliers, consumed by self-satisfaction. He smiled faintly to himself, a smile that spoke of patience, of inevitable vindication, and of the quiet thrill of watching the wheels of fate turn. For he knew that the final act had not yet arrived, that the collision of past and present, betrayal and justice, was approaching with a certainty that could not be denied. And when it came, the world would see the man she had discarded not as poor, not as a failure, but as the master of a kingdom she had never imagined. Months passed, and Gregory's empire quietly grew. The once modest heirloom of his uncle Henry Cole's fortune had blossomed into an intricate network of properties, factories, and investments. No one knew the man behind the acquisitions, only whispers of a mysterious new billionaire who moved like a shadow, unseen, but immensely powerful. Gregory reveled in this anonymity. Every decision, every purchase, every strategic acquisition was a careful note in a symphony he conducted from the background. A symphony that would one day reveal the full scale of his brilliance. Vanessa's life with Raymond had become a glittering illusion, polished to perfection in public. Social media posts of lavish parties, private yachts, and designer wardrobes reinforced her belief that she had truly escaped the failed man she had once called her husband. She flaunted her life with the arrogance of someone who believed she had outsmarted fate itself. The more she celebrated her triumph, the more she unknowingly fed the narrative Gregory had crafted for her eventual downfall. Gregory began to attend the edges of her world, never revealing himself but observing carefully. Charity events, art auctions, exclusive galas. He studied Vanessa and Raymond from the periphery, noting her habits, her interactions, and the subtle cracks beneath the surface of her confident exterior. He remembered the early days of their marriage, the way she had laughed at his jokes, the sparkle in her eyes when they had dreamed together, and the slow, almost imperceptible shift toward disappointment when money grew tight. That memory fueled his patience, reminding him that timing was everything. He also reflected on his own journey, years of poverty, manual labor, and humiliation. The moments when he had wiped sweat from his brow in the harsh sun, or struggled through back-breaking work just to survive, had taught him the value of endurance. Those years were not wasted. They had been a crucible, forging a version of himself that Vanessa could never anticipate. Each hardship had strengthened his resolve, shaping him into a man capable of wielding wealth and influence with precision. One evening, as he visited one of his new factories, a familiar face appeared among the employees, a young engineer he had once mentored at Colty Fabricators. The engineer didn't recognize him, but Gregory observed quietly, noting potential leaders who could help him expand his growing network. He had learned to identify talent and loyalty, lessons that had been painfully taught during the collapse of his business. These careful selections ensured that every aspect of his empire would operate smoothly, ready for the day when he would step out of the shadows. Meanwhile, Vanessa's overconfidence continued to escalate. She held a high-profile charity gala, one of the most exclusive events of the season, inviting elites, socialites, and influencers alike. She basked in the attention, imagining herself untouchable while Raymond complimented her with practiced charm. The evening sparkled with champagne, glittering gowns, and the hum of carefully curated admiration. Vanessa didn't notice the small whispers about a new, enigmatic billionaire whose identity remained hidden. She didn't suspect that the man she had discarded was quietly orchestrating a comeback that would eclipse everything she had achieved. Gregory, attending under an alias, observed from the sidelines. He watched her laugh, watched her sway to the music, and stored each detail in the vault of his memory. He had no intention of immediate confrontation. He understood the art of the delayed reveal. Every look, every movement, every word she spoke would serve a purpose when the time came. The quiet thrill of anticipation pulsed through him, not for revenge, but for justice and the satisfaction of strategic mastery. The whispers in society about the mysterious billionaire grew louder. Art collectors speculated about his acquisitions. Business journals hinted at the precision and foresight behind his investments, and gossip columns wondered who could be behind such an unprecedented surge of wealth. And yet Vanessa remained blind, intoxicated by her life of luxury and the assumption that Gregory's failure was final. She had underestimated him, as she always had, failing to consider the depth of his resilience and the scale of his intellect. One night, Gregory received an update from his attorney about a significant acquisition, a chain of high-end manufacturing facilities in key locations that would elevate his empire to global influence. The news filled him with quiet satisfaction, not pride, but the satisfaction of knowing that the groundwork he had laid would soon intersect with the world Vanessa inhabited. He envisioned the day she would finally encounter him, not as the man she had abandoned, but as the force behind the empire she had dismissed. He thought of Raymond, who had once seemed a rival only in charm and social standing, now a minor obstacle compared to the careful orchestration of Gregory's empire. The collision would be inevitable, and when it came, Vanessa's arrogance would crumble and the truth of her misjudgment would be undeniable. Gregory's patience, endurance, and strategic foresight had transformed him from a poor, abandoned husband into a silent king, ready to reclaim a narrative she believed she had won. As the gala ended, Gregory slipped into the night, unseen yet fully aware of the lives unfolding around him. The glitter, the laughter, the illusions of control, they were all temporary, all fragile. And he, the man she had so casually discarded, was the unseen architect of the next chapter. The stage was set, the pieces were moving, and the inevitable reveal loomed closer with every passing day. The city's most anticipated gala of the year shimmered with chandeliers, glittering gowns, and the hum of self-importance. Vanessa Hart floated through the crowd, radiant and confident, convinced she had secured her place atop society's ladder. Raymond, ever the attentive partner, whispered compliments, his pride in her radiance matching her own. Every camera, every socialite's gaze, seemed to affirm the narrative she had built for herself. That Gregory Hart was a man of the past, a failure whose life had ended the moment she walked away. She didn't notice the subtle tension in the air, the whispers that skated across the ballroom like a hidden current. Society was abuzz with speculation about a mysterious new billionaire whose presence had quietly transformed industries and real estate. No one knew his identity, no one, that is, except Gregory Hart, standing at the edge of the room in a tailored suit that bespoke understated power. Gone was the quiet man she had scorned. In his place stood the silent king, radiating calm authority and commanding attention without uttering a word. Vanessa's eyes caught him first, though she didn't yet recognize him. Something about his bearing stirred a flicker of curiosity, a ripple of unease. Gregory's gaze met hers briefly, measured, steady, and then he moved deeper into the gala, allowing the crowd to notice his presence as whispers began to circulate. The woman who had mocked him, abandoned him, and flaunted her triumph in his face now felt an unsteady shift in the room's energy. Cameras subtly pivoted, conversations stuttered, and socialites craned their necks toward the man who seemed to command respect with mere posture. Gregory's mind wandered briefly to the years of hardship, the humiliations of manual labor, the relentless poverty, the heartbreak of watching the woman he loved choose another man. Every setback had been a lesson, every moment of endurance a step toward this ultimate reveal. He had built more than wealth. He had built influence, patience, and mastery over his destiny, and now, all those years of silent strategy converged in this single evening. As the host called for a toast, the room's attention shifted to Gregory. A business magazine editor approached, introducing him not as a guest, but as the keynote speaker of the night. Gasps rippled through the crowd as it became undeniable. The mysterious billionaire who had quietly reshaped the city's landscape was the very man Vanessa had abandoned. Her face paled, mascara threatening to streak as realization dawned. Every carefully curated victory she had flaunted suddenly felt hollow against the weight of his transformation. Gregory's voice was calm, measured, but it carried authority that silenced whispers. "Good evening," he began. "Tonight is a celebration of vision, resilience, and the power of patience." His eyes found Vanessa's across the room, not with malice but with a quiet detachment that made her heart pound. It's remarkable what can happen when one refuses to be defeated by circumstance. Some may have believed I was lost, but every setback was a lesson, every obstacle a step toward something greater. Vanessa's lips parted, a whisper of disbelief escaping. Raymond shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tidal shift but unable to comprehend its magnitude. Socialites whispered her name, eyes darting between her and Gregory, as the man she had humiliated became the symbol of power, resilience, and respect. The contrast was staggering. Vanessa, once the queen of her carefully constructed world, now appeared fragile, overconfident, and painfully unaware of the empire rising silently behind her. In the following days, gossip columns chronicled every detail. Vanessa's attempts to reconnect, to explain, to salvage her status were met with polite detachment from Gregory. He had no interest in vengeance. His satisfaction was in the quiet fulfillment of destiny, the natural consequences of underestimating a man in his lowest moments. Social fallout enveloped her. Invitations dwindled, whispers turned to ridicule, and her carefully cultivated social dominance began to erode. The world that had once celebrated her triumph now observed her miscalculation with fascination. Meanwhile, Gregory's empire thrived silently in the background. Properties, factories, and investments continued to grow under his meticulous oversight. His influence, subtle yet pervasive, became undeniable. He granted interviews only occasionally, framing his story as one of resilience, vision, and patience, a lesson in the power of endurance rather than a tale of personal revenge. The man who had been dismissed, abandoned, and humiliated now stood as a symbol of strategic mastery and silent strength. Vanessa, once untouchable, now understood the cost of her betrayal. Raymond offered no comfort. The glitter of wealth and charm could not shield her from the truth. Every social misstep, every failed attempt to regain relevance only reinforced the poetic justice of her situation. Gregory, by contrast, walked through life unburdened by bitterness, having transformed every moment of pain into wisdom, strategy, and opportunity. On a quiet morning, Gregory reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From the collapse of Colty tea fabricators to the inheritance from his uncle, from poverty and humiliation to discreet accumulation of power, he had mastered patience, resilience, and influence. Vanessa had been a chapter, a test of character, a catalyst for growth. And now the story had come full circle, not with vengeance, but with undeniable, elegant triumph. The city, still buzzing with gossip and speculation, would remember Gregory Hart as the man who had been underestimated, abandoned, and dismissed, and yet had emerged victorious, quietly shaping the world in ways no one could ignore. He had become more than a billionaire. He had become a lesson in patience, strategy, and the transformative power of resilience. And Vanessa, watching from the periphery, could only witness the silent king she once discarded standing tall, unshaken, and untouchable.